What are some of the signs that I've fallen into the dread zone? I'll give you a few. If I'm worrying, I'm in the, can you see it or not? What about if I'm reliving the past, good or bad? Am I in the good zone or I'm in the dread zone. How do I know I'm in the dread zone? Listen, because I don't have any life other than what my thoughts and feelings are giving me in that moment. That's the dread zone. Not present to life, not receiving what happens when I'm fully aware of myself. That's called the living zone. That's the real zone. That's the presence of God, being fully awake and aware to everything that wants to drag me into the dread zone. Useless suffering is the dread zone. Useful suffering is discovering where something wants to drag me down into the dead zone. How about this? Afraid of what some unwanted moment may mean or not mean. Am I in the right zone or am I in the dead zone? Let's use the light zone. Light zone or dread zone? Anybody want to come up with one? If I'm rushing, am I in the light zone or am I in the dread zone? Now, why am I in the dread zone if I'm rushing? Some of you are masters at rushing. I'd love to know the answer. If I'm anxious, am I in the light zone or the dead zone? The dread zone. And by the way, let's put that together. And if I stay long enough in the dread zone, am I rising above that? Or will I find more and more reasons to justify my anxiety and my fear and gradually be dragged down into the dead zone, which exists? Any others here? Who wants to tell me one? Avoiding anyone or any situation. Am I in the light zone or the dread zone? Why am I in the dread zone if I avoid people and problems? Why? Because, because something in me tells me it's better to avoid that situation than to meet the part of me that knows it's going to lose control if it goes in there. So fear is my guide. Fear is the God of the dead, and it is directing me to do for what it wants, not what I want. Speaking of avoiding, here's another one in the dread zone. Any form of psychologically defending yourself. How many of you know that you have a hard time, if at all, admitting that you were wrong? You should all be nodding your heads. That's called the dread zone. And the reason it's the dread zone is because it's very near the dead zone. How so? Because the more you believe that you are infallible, or the more you're sure that no one else should ever question your judgment, the more crystallized you have become inside of an image of yourself that believes it owes nothing to anyone under any circumstances at all. And it is a very short fall. This world is today incapable of seeing where it has made a mistake. No one makes mistakes. No one. And if we ever do admit we made a mistake, it is to gain an advantage over the person that we are admitting him to, because so they can see what a really good person we are to admit where we went wrong. What a marvelous thing it is to begin to understand that anything in you that thinks it can't make a mistake is the mistake itself, and identifying with it is the chief feature of the dread zone. How about some others while we're working here? Chris, she said, making plans to basically conquer the person that you've had conflict with. What are you going to say to them? How are you going to make sure they know that you know everything about them and that they're never going to trespass again because you see through them completely? And do that all, by the way, without any indication that you're trying to make that happen that way. Perfectly sneaky. Why is that the dread zone? Why is that the dread zone? How many of you do that? Go over conversations. And sometimes you don't even have the conversation. You just go over it and over and over again. Why? Any form of dark dialogue, is it the light zone or the dark zone? Why is it the dread zone? Because you're in imagination trying to solve a problem that only exists because a part of you wants nothing to do with seeing that it created the very thing that you're now trying to get rid of the conflict from it. And what happens when resistance goes round and round, down and down goes the consciousness involved in it, from the dread zone into the dead zone. What else are some indications of the dread zone? I'm waiting. Sally. Indecisiveness. Yeah, that's a form of the dread zone because you can spend your whole life indecisive, believing that it proves you really wanted to decide. And there you sit dying of indecisiveness. Yeah. Indecisiveness is the fear of consequence. Indecisiveness is the fear of consequence. So rather than make an action and be active, I'll be passive to all those thoughts and feelings, weighing everything left and right and dropping deeper and deeper into the dread zone, not far from the dead zone. How about, I'm surprised no one said it. How many of you are masters of justifying yourselves? Oh my God. If you could see yourself, most of you don't even know you're doing it all the time. These little quips, these sarcastic remarks, this slight defensive posture, justifying oneself is always an action that comes out of the dread zone. And why is justifying myself part of the dread zone? Anybody? Because I'm afraid not to be right. I justify because I have to prove to myself that I didn't make that mistake. I'm not like that. You made me like that. Any form of justification or explaining any form of negative reaction or behavior on your part belongs to the dread zone. Anybody else? That's a big one. Complaining. Why is complaining part of the dread zone? Anybody? Come on, this is your work. Well, Charlie said it's all about me. That's part of it, but that's not what I'm looking for. Complaining is the avoidance of self-responsibility. What else is it? Why is complaining an aspect of the dread zone? Here's why. Because no one who complains about their life changes their life. That's what drops from dread into dead. Complaining is the way in which I excuse myself from having to do anything because my complaint always has something to do with someone or something that I blame for my negativity. And the more that you find something to blame for your fear or your negativity, the more solid becomes the dread zone. Anyone else? Judging. That's a big one. Anytime I'm in judgment of someone or something, I am in the dread zone. Why do I judge any other human being? They're not confirming the image I have of myself. Anybody else? All judgment begins with an image. So it is the image justifying itself through judgment. And the more that you justify and identify with the judgment, the more that consciousness is crystallized. And the more it's crystallized, the more into the dread zone it drops and nearer to the dead zone. Ellen, finding excuses for avoiding what I know I ought to do. And of course, that's the dread zone. And why is it the dread zone? Anybody? Because weakness always has a reason to explain why it's weak. It never says I'm weak. It always says that's too much. That's too big of a deal for me. I can't go through that. Are you kidding me? And therefore, limitation becomes the person's identity. And the more the limitation becomes a person's identity, the deeper into the dread zone they fall. Anybody else before I go on? Roger. Imagining myself to be something that I'm not. Of course, that can't be separated from the sudden shock that you're nothing like what you imagined yourself. And then comes the sudden imagination and all the rest of that that justifies what happened. This couldn't possibly be because of the way I am, because I am something very special. Anyone? Eric. That's on my list. Arrogance. You want to talk about the dread zone? Why is any act of arrogance on the part of a human being, whether it's through their swagger or the tone they use or the things they buy to make themselves appear special, why is arrogance a key feature of the dread zone? There is no arrogance without fear. Fear is the father of arrogance. And if fear is the father of arrogance, then that means when you are arrogant, you are being fathered, you are being sired by that fear. And that's why it's the dread zone. Look at every leader on this planet who finally fell into the pit that they helped dig. And what do you see? Arrogance. Arrogance that masked fear, and fear that masked the refusal to see themselves as they are, or more accurately, to believe in the image that they didn't just have of themselves, but that the world they are in cultivates so they can feed on that person until they throw the person into the pit or give them to the lions. You need to see it if you want to be free. Any others before I get to my 5 words? Joni. Fawning. Why is fawning an element, a part of the dread zone? We fawn in front of other people for fear that they won't like us, or for fear that they may tell us or ask us to do something that we don't want to do, that we don't want to meet in front of ourselves. Like fawning in front of somebody that you know you need to call them on the carpet because they're doing you wrong. Why don't we do that? Well, because I might lose it. And what might lose it? The I that lives in the dread zone. All right, get ready to write down the 5 words. This is how you begin to bring an end to the feeling of fear. In the moment of the onset of that reaction, and you know what I'm talking about now, right? It's a simple question, 5 words. You ready? Am I dread or am I alive? Am I dread or am I alive? You understand the play on the words, right? Not am I dead or am I alive? That sounds stupid. But when I understand that if I'm living with dread, I'm right near the dead zone. I have 1 foot in it. Am I dread or am I alive? I'm driving in my car and I'm anxious. Man, I feel alive. Worrying about my money, about my health. Man, the sensation is strong. But what I don't see is that in that moment, I'm in the dread zone. I'm not in the light. I'm not a lamplighter. I'm in the dread zone. And how do I know that I'm in the dread zone? Because by the grace of God, should it occur for you to ask that question, am I dread or am I alive? You'll see that anytime you're in thought, you're in the dread zone. Anytime.